thinking, now, what in the world am I going to do now? I'm about 10, 15 feet under the water. I can't move my arms or legs, and I've been holding my breath for a minute. And so finally, the reflex comes in. You start to breathe water. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not good.
This is Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. I'm your host, Trapper Jack. Here's where we focus in on the collisions, the everyday collisions of heaven and earth, where God shoots off the flare gun saying, here I am. See me? Do you see me? What about it? Do you see me here? Special welcome to our coast-to-coast AM radio listeners who heard me on an episode that I haven't been on yet. As I record this, it's a couple of days away, and so if you heard the show and joined us, then I guess things went okay. This is where we do talk about these encounters. Could be with angels, could be with divine intervention. Oh, I want to make mention to you also, since if you are a Coast to Coast AM radio listener, a couple of episodes back, in an episode called Midnight in the Desert, I talked to Dave Schrader. I was actually on his Midnight in the Desert show, but I brought some of it onto this podcast. He's had amazing encounters, and that name may be very familiar to you because he used to be a fill-in host on Coast to Coast AM. He'd fill in for George Norrie. So listen to that episode. I think you'll appreciate hearing Dave once again. But at the end of the episode, after these amazing encounters, and he shouldn't be alive. He should not be alive today, other than through divine intervention. You'll hear that story. But at the end of the episode, he basically says to me, "Why me? Why am I getting these huge encounters?" And other people say to me, they don't feel anything or hear anything or get anything. And I said to him, it's not a competition. These encounters are not a competition. God touches us, each one in our own way. We get our own messages, if you will, little things, big things, whatever they are. So a couple nights back, my wife Beth is in bed, and she's catching up on her podcast. She hadn't heard a couple of the last couple, so she's listening. I'm laying next to her. I'm half asleep, and she's hearing the end of the Dave Schrader episode where I'm saying, hey, it's not a competition. Everybody gets their own messages their own way, whether it's big or small or whatever. At the precise moment the episode ends, our ceiling light goes on. And I hear Beth go, well, that's weird. And I'm going, and then she explains to me, but just God saying, hi, I'm right here, Beth. I'm always right here. And this is just me now saying to you, hi, this one's just for you. Nice little moment there. Today's episode, huge moment for Jeff Burgard. Even how he found this podcast. He hasn't even listened to Touched by Heaven yet. He hasn't even heard it.
I'll tell you how I found you out. I just happened to cruise into Coast to Coast AM, and I see your, I guess it's pre-recorded. You're going to be featured this Wednesday. Trapper Jack, Angels and Miracles. Let's see what it says about you, Trapper. Just says show canceled. No, I'm just kidding. All right. It says show, Wednesday, September 19th. Host is George Norrie. Guest is Trapper Jack. Here's what they say about you. Long-time morning drive radio host in Cleveland, Trapper Jack, has for over 18 years been compiling stories of amazing synchronicities and coincidences which defy logic and statistics. His many stories include real-life accounts of what appear to be angelic interventions, healings, and miracles. He's the first half guest. And then it's got your touchedbyheaven.net website, and you can click on that. So it's a pretty good intro.
And I don't think they've had a lot of me types on, so I give them credit.
No, they have not.
So my special thanks to Lisa Lyon and the host George Norrie for having me on the program. For those unaware, Coast to Coast AM it's an all-night show, huge show, hundreds of radio stations. So welcome to all. Okay, Jeff, let's get to it, man. Your story is something. So your background and story.
Okay. Background is born and raised in New Jersey, a suburban area of New York, and raised our kids in the church. But I was one of those Christians you probably met that knew the Lord, but it wasn't number one in my life.
And I take it there was there an encounter that led you to finding your way?
Let me get right. That's where Jeff changed. If the Jeff Burgard you're talking to, Trapper, would be unrecognizable to pre-1992 Jeff Burgard. Before that, I was very secular in my outlook. Great guy to know, but I had not a lot of friends. And this all took place. I'll get right into the story. Rewind the tape to summer of 1993. I've got two girls, 8 and 12. My sister lives in D.C. We go down to visit the sister during nice weather in September, and that's when the Northerners all take their, Labor Day vacation. So off we went to join her at her rental cottage on the beach in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And so we arrive, and as the kiddies always are, they first run right up to the front of the house. Let's go in swimming. Well, there had been a terrific Atlantic storm, probably a hurricane of some sort, that had skirted, hadn't hit Delaware or New Jersey, but just gone by, and they had the yellow flags up, and the waves were really choppy. So I said, girls, I'm going to be the bad guy. We're not going swimming. We're just going to walk the beach. So they said, oh, come on. They worked on me, and they said, all right, here's the deal, the compromise. We're just going to wade and get our ankles wet. Well, unlike Florida beach sand, Delaware beach sand is very coarse. We have this beautiful white sand out here, and Delaware is real rough and coarse and yellow. And with the wave action, we went to walk the beach, and it was like, wow, we're really sinking into the sand. Isn't this fun? And then the breakers started coming, and I said, all our street clothes now are getting wet. We have to go back to the cottage and change. Well, then came another breaker, and then my daughter says, look, I'm swimming. And what had happened is it had pulled the sand out from under her. And I said, well, your mother's not going to be happy. And then one got me. Long story short, 30 seconds later, my youngest daughter and myself are about 20 feet offshore in the mother of all rips. So I'm a good swimmer, and we're being yanked offshore. There are no lifeguards there. And my other daughter on the beach is saying, boy, is Mom going to be mad? Both of you now are completely wet. So what took over was I realized this was getting a little hairy, so I said, we both have to get back to shore. So my younger daughter, to her credit, followed the rule we all follow in Florida, which is you swim parallel to the coast when you're in a rip. You break the rip, and then you swim back. You do like an L turn. But being foolish and not thinking about it, I said, well, I've got to get to the beach sooner, and I'm only 30 feet out, so I'm going to swim straight back to the beach. Trapper, if you swim against the mother of all rips, you're going to lose. And so my daughters are shouting at me, teasing me, boy, Daddy, you've been swimming for 3 minutes now, and you're even further out. And so what happened was I swam to exhaustion. I mean, now I was like 75, 100 feet out and continuing. And I don't know if you probably had experience swimming, Trapper. Your arms and legs feel like rubber. You ever had that experience, Trapper?
What you're talking about almost happened to me in Hawaii, actually, where I got yanked away, and I thought, am I going to be able to be strong enough to get back? I know that feeling. It's helpless. It's like, oh, please tell me I can get back, because I'm not a great swimmer, so I'm going down.
So we got one daughter on the beach. Now she's getting worried. Her name's Nicole. Renee I couldn't see her because the breakers were so high with this big Atlantic storm, the result of which was causing the rip. I knew she was off to my left, but she's a very good swimmer. She had actually taken scuba diving lessons, so I figured she's doing the right thing. And then by the time I realized it, I was totally swum to exhaustion. So I say, well, I can just tread water, and then my legs were tired to exhaustion, and I started to go down. Now, the day was bright, crisp blue. So as I'm going under the water, and the ocean was pretty clear, I can see the sun up there, and I'm trying to do my, treading water, and my arms just won't move. And I'm thinking, now, what in the world am I going to do now? I'm about 10, 15 feet under the water. I can't move my arms or legs, and I've been holding my breath for a minute. And so finally it's a reflex comes in. You start to breathe water. And Trapper, there's nothing more terrifying to a mammal than breathing water. For the first 10 seconds, it was absolute mammalian terror with the water entering my lungs, and I just freaked out. And then oddest thing happened. After about 15 seconds, suddenly I think, this isn't so bad. I said, this water isn't too bad to breathe. And I'm looking around and seeing all these twinkly little sunlight coming into the ocean, looking up at the sun, and I'm breathing water. And then suddenly something took my mind back to when my father died. My father had, in 1955, taken his family, to the Seaside Heights boardwalk off New Jersey, and had a cardiac arrest, a cardiac infarction on the beach. And in the unenlightened 1950s, the lifeguard told him to walk a half mile back to the lifeguard stand in the middle of a heart attack. He died. He died on the beach. And so now, and the final thing that happened, Trapper, this is amazing. As I'm now at the point where I'm realizing this could be it, and thinking, what am I going to do? Have you ever watched the old 1920s movies when it's over? There's like a black circle that closes on the screen, like the end of the feature. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah, I do. Where it just kind of swallows up
it shrinks down.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all this beautiful twinkling water and sunshine, I'm noticing a black ring is forming and it's closing in, and I'm thinking to myself, this is not good. And I'm feeling so good floating around. And what got me out of it was I realized that if I don't do something, that I'm going to leave my wife in the same situation my mother was in, which she's going to be a widow with a dead husband and raising 2 kids, exactly what my mother went through. So and then this beautiful peacefulness leaves me, and just for a second, I had a terror, but not for my faith, but for my family. And my lungs were full of Atlantic Ocean water, so I couldn't speak, obviously. But with my final thought, I didn't know I was doing it. I prayed the exact same words that St. Peter prayed when he had been walking towards Jesus from the boat, remember, and he started to go down. If you read the Bible, it says, "Save me, Lord." That's what he cried out. And, of course, Jesus reached down and saved him. So I screamed in my mind, "Save me, Lord." And so nothing happened when I said, "Save, Trapper." Nothing happened when I said, "Me." When I finished screaming in my mind, "Lord," he let me finish the sentence. A hand, a physical right hand, because the thumb was on the left side. I later figured out that means it's a right hand. Hit me right above the belt line. Figure where your belt is and go about 2 inches north of that. And I have a 40-inch waist, and the thumb was wrapped around my left waist, and the pinkies and fourth finger were on my right. So that means it's a 45 or 50-inch hand. Physical, if I could feel all 5 fingers. And it hit me. I'd played tackle football like in the street when I was growing up in New Jersey. It was like the worst hard tackle you ever got, right at the midsection. Luckily, Trapper, I was facing the shore. I think God had probably waiting for me to get oriented the right way. And this thing hit me and bent me backwards double. In other words, if you stood up and someone hit you hard right at the waist, your head goes back and your feet go back if you're floating, and you're like a letter C. That's where I was, pushing me like a ram. Now, cut from me a second to my daughter on the beach. She said she was freaking out at this point because I had been underwater for now a couple minutes, didn't know where I was. Suddenly, she said she saw this wake, like World War II torpedo movies. She said, "I saw this thing. It looked like the bubbles, like when the Japanese launched the torpedoes in the war movies. It was coming right for me." I was forming a wake just under the water. This hand was pushing me towards the beach. And again, to show how blockheaded I am, I had nothing to do with this. You know, the thought going through my mind, Trapper, was, "Stop, this hurts." I mean, what a complete idiot. Instead of, "Praise God, he's saving me," it was such an uncomfortable feeling. I was just going, "Ah!" I couldn't talk yet because the water was still in my lungs. So anyway, that lasted probably about 5 seconds. Next thing I knew, my knees were abraded on the Atlantic beach sand because this thing had pushed me about 100 feet against a rip, just about 3 or 4 feet underwater, and I essentially ground it out on a sandbar. And so finally I was, "Oh, thank you, it stopped." And then I realized where I was, lifted up, and I was in a perfect position. The water level was right at my shoulders. And I said, "Oh, I'm above water." And immediately I started like throwing up because my lungs were full of ocean water. And that wasn't, I'll skip that part. But I had to relieve myself of all this water in my lungs, and that almost blacked me out. So I crawled onto the beach, and my other daughter then walked out of the ocean just about 50 feet south of me. She had done the right thing. And my other daughter said, "What in the world happened?" And all I said is, "I can't talk about this." So what that led me to believe, that started about 3 weeks of introspection, like what I know what happened to me. I just got out of something that I couldn't get out of. Like we've all had instances in our life where, geez, I almost had an accident. Geez, I almost died off the cliff. This one I never got out of, Trapper. This is one that I had nothing to do with. I said, "How in the world am I alive?" I look back when I grounded out, there was no hand. There was nothing, of course. There was nothing in the water. There was nothing in the world that could have done this. And so then I said, "Well, how am I going to treat this?" So for 3 weeks, I did soul searching and had to fit this into my faith picture. And I came to the conclusion that this was my second baptism, that I owed my life to the Lord, and I needed to rededicate myself because he had given me my life back. And this was just such an unbelievable thing. So what I wound up doing was doing a lot of research on this. And this is, Trapper, this happens all the time. For those that have this type of rescue, I ran into many accounts of it happening on dry land where rock climbers are scaling walls with a buddy, and they get caught, and I can't go forward, I can't go back, and they're with their fingers dug into the rock ledge 300 feet above something, and there's nothing they can do, and eventually their arms turn to rubber and their legs turn to rubber, and they lose their grip, and they would die, obviously plummet to death. And instead, this large hand hits them at the waist and holds them with their belly button against the rock. I couldn't believe it. There's accounts of this. And in one account, the buddy called on his cell phone and got mountain rescue there, and this person was held for a half hour with his hand. And when mountain rescue came, they saw his buddy up there, arms and legs limp, hanging, vertical, and he's stuck like adhesive to the rock.
Wow.
So
Wow.
Yeah. Now, let me go to my final. I gave one more example, a personal example. What God now puts in my path are people that have joined this quote unquote club that I joined. He's putting these people in my life all the time. I'll just use one example. About 5-10 years ago, the church I was in, the women's church group normally had luncheons with just women, but for some time they decided, well, we're going to have some men for the first time. So they invited the men of the church to come and listen to their speaker. And it's a young guy, a little bit younger than me at the time. I was in my late 40s. He must have been 30. Very buff-looking, very full of energy. And the first thing everybody noticed about him, he had the crew-cut hair, but he had these indentions around his head, like somebody had put in your thumb and pressed in, and it healed all the way around his thumb, these in marks of his skull. And I said, I got to ask you, George, or whatever his name is, what in the world, I don't want to be, it's personal, but what's with these things around your head? And he says, well, I didn't want to mention it because some people think it's crazy. And then my little antennas went off, Trapper, like, I said, well, try me. I might not think it's so crazy. So he says, all right, sit down. And so he tells me a story. He's a farm boy from Colorado, knew the Lord, but really wasn't interested in anything other than sports. Went to Maine, got certified as a scuba diver. Second or third dive off near Bar Harbor, Maine, he goes down with weights, with a wetsuit, and dives the wrong place, gets caught in a violent tidal wave, the tidal rock going in between these big rocks. They have 20-foot rocks there in Maine. Smashes his neck and his head against a rock while he's underwater and basically gives him a cervical break. He's broken his neck. Can't move his arms, can't move his legs, just like happened to me, except mine was from exhaustion. And he said, plus, we didn't have no walkie-talkies. His buddies are down there, but he couldn't see them, and they couldn't see him amid the rocks, and he's almost out of air. And so he prayed. He was a Christian. He prays to the Lord God, save me from this impossible situation. And a hand, he said, materialized under his butt this time, not around his waist, lifted him physically up against the tide and placed him on the flat of one of these table rocks, which is like right near the beach, half on, half in the water. So meanwhile, his buddies are just freaking out, like, where's George? We can't find him. They figure he's dead somehow and been washed out. They call Air Sea Rescue, the Coast Guard. Coast Guard's flying over looking, and they see him on top of the rock. And they say, search parties, there's a diver laying on his back on top of the rocks. No one, because he was, he couldn't do anything, couldn't move. And that was his story. They got a backboard there, one of those things they put you to when you have cervical break. And because they got him in time, they put this halo. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody with metal halos.
Right.
And he wore the halo for 18 months, I think he said. And he was lucky. He was paralyzed through the impact, not through severing the spine. They were able to restore his arms and his legs. And so he did the same thing. He said, I just had to come to Jesus moment. He said, I started, learning about the Lord, and I became a missionary, and I'm off. He said, I had no intention of doing it. And so I told him my story. I said, and we were laughing. We said, well, we've joined a club. It's just, this is, God picks the people. It's a club you wouldn't want to join, but, once you're in it.
you say God picks, but in your case, and his case too, you cried out. You cried out for him. And that's the difference. That's the difference. That
is the difference. And, what I did is immediately after it happened, I started researching it. I have a master's in education. I was a teacher for a while. I've done a lot of different things besides building. And I did my research, and I found out throughout the Bible, Trapper, about my strong right hand, I will save you. God shelters you under his hand, Psalm 91. I mean, it's just all of these, there's references galore, and the Bible is literal. I mean, literally, there is a strong right hand of the Lord that will save those who love him.
I'll tell you, in my previous podcast called Blind Faith Live, Denny Thompson tells a very similar story. He'd been in a motorcycle accident, lost his right arm and right leg, I believe it was. And he was in a coma, I want to say for a couple of months. So he doesn't know exactly at what point this happened in, but he remembers sitting in this darkness, and it looked like there were demons around. You could see eyes and a little bit of formation, but it was dark and ugly, sitting in a chair. Yeah. And it was bad. And then I don't remember him saying that he cried out, but there's a kindness to Denny. I mean, he was living a hard life. He was certainly on not the most holy of paths, but there's a kindness about Denny. And suddenly there was this large hand, the hand of God, Jesus, as you mentioned, picked it up by the butt. Similar thing where the whole hand picked him up from underneath. It just picked him up out of that. And it's like, this happens. This happens.
Yes, it does.
And the next thing he knew, he was waking up out of the coma with his father standing over him, and he found out, what everything that had happened. But he was told, God told him basically, it's all going to be okay. Know that it's going to be okay. Yeah. Then he woke up to find out he was missing an arm and a leg, and there's lots of pain. Wow. But God is always with him now. God is always with him now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and this has happened many times to non-believers. The last minute, there's a story about, I read this. I don't know his account personally, but a non-believer was an atheist. He goes over to France. He has something happens internally. He has some sort of bad abdominal condition, and they're having a strike in the hospital. France always has strikes. And while he's waiting for a bed, he basically flatlines and dies, goes to hell, and it's terrible. Actually demonic picture of hell, demons around, terrific pain. And suddenly he remembers he had Christian friends, and they used to teach him a song, Jesus loves me, this I know. So he figures, well, I'll try singing the song and see what happens. And a light appeared above him. And this light came down, and actually he heard a voice evangelizing him, giving him the gospel message. And he said, yeah, anything, get me out of here. And apparently his heart, it wasn't just a foxhole conversion, because suddenly he found himself rising up, and then next thing he knew, he woke up ready for the morgue. Apparently the French don't wait very long when you flatline out. They hustle you off. And the people freaked out and screamed, here's this person that's been pronounced dead 7-8 minutes before, and now he's woke up,
If you want to hear the whole story, go to episode 6. Yeah. His name is Howard Storm. And Howard is episode 6 of Touched by Heaven. It's an amazing, amazing story. He hated God. He hated anything to do with God. He was an atheist. Wow. And he talk about a come to Jesus moment. That bright light that suddenly appeared was Jesus and picked him up in his arms.
But let me just conclude how the aftermath and how it affected you. Know a little bit about Jeff now. And everything changed about me. I mean, I really got into my faith in a big way. I would go into the church and people would say, he's now our Bible teacher. They may be a Bible teacher. I started teaching Bible and getting words of inspiration. I mean, literally words of knowledge about things I didn't think I know. I didn't get them from natural means. I was ordained an elder teaching elder in 2 different churches. And then I was asked by this person in Vero, can you appear on television and just do an evangelical show?
As you told the story, there was this kind of upbeat, natural nature of you, and it was all light. But in the moment, there was no lightness there, was there, Jeff?
Absolutely none. And again, but I got to tell you something, Trapper. Here's the thing that'll be of use to you and other Christians about this. When the moment of death comes, when you literally are ready to check out, all the fear and terror. I know how submariners feel when when they were torpedoed and they're going down and they have to breathe well. I know the terror is unbelievable. I know what water drowning is like, and it's the worst panic and terror I've ever experienced. But when it comes time to actually make that transition, what surprised me with my analytical mind was I went from the worst terror I've ever had, just like hitting a light bulb. Suddenly it was the peace that passes all understanding. And rather than just say, peace, my mind goes, wait a minute, this is impossible. 1 nanosecond, again, you were freaking out, and now you want to just breathe this water and float around, look at the fishies and the beautiful sunshine. So while I was experiencing this, I knew something was up because, my rational mind, above all else, was saying, this can't be. So I think what you can take away in other Christians is, no matter how God decides you're going to be leaving this earth, when the time comes, whether it's cancer or a traffic accident, whatever, you'll go through it, but there's going to be no lingering when you make that transition to be with the Lord. It's going to be absolute night and absolute day, and it's going to happen in a nanosecond. Mm-hmm. So this hand at that moment. Right. Do you know it's a hand, or did that hit you later when you thought, wait a minute, the left thumb was around? No, that's a very good question, Trapper. You're very good. No, that I actually knew it because the individual fingers, put it this way, the fingers were not that tight together where you couldn't feel them. I'd say the pinky was about an inch above your belt, Trapper. The pointer finger was up under my shoulder, and there were 4 of them. And I felt like steel bars. And I had another thing pinching. The one that hurt the most was the thumb pinching my waist. I guess God had to guide me a certain way with the current. But if you hold your left hand or your right hand up now, and look at that fold between your thumb and your forefinger. Well, you're blind. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I remember. I can kind of. I can put. I can see it sort of.
That is where that's where the Lord got me on the left side. So that was where the real pressure was, because I realized later I was being guided. But when I was in the moment, I knew it was 4 fingers and a hand. And that was another thing. Besides being on this wild e-ticket ride like at Disney towards the shore, the pressure, because you remember I'm going against a riptide, and the Lord is pushing me enough where it's a visible wake. So he wasn't making any bones about it. He wanted me on that shore as fast as possible.
And your daughter saw that. Explain that again, how your daughter saw you.
Yeah, she didn't know that her sister had made it out of the rip, and she hadn't seen me now for about 4 or 5 minutes, because I went down for the 3rd time and there was no dad around. And so the Lord was pushing me right towards her. And I have dentures, I was hoping my teeth wouldn't fly out. I mean, and yeah, really. I didn't think of that at the time. It stopped when my knees hit the sand.
Okay.
And then I was on my knees and I was just swaying in the water.
During that, what she thinks it was 5 minutes? You think it was 5 minutes?
She thinks about 5 minutes, yeah. 5 minutes underwater,
yeah. Because I can't imagine. You're a daughter. You see your dad disappear. You see your sister out. Where are they? To be gone that long, she had to be thinking the worst, the absolute worst. So I'm wondering did she have any experience during those 5 minutes of it's going to be okay, or was it just all terror for her? All terror.
All terror for her. No comfort. It would have been nice if they had comforted her, but nothing at all.
Right. Well, they knew what the outcome was going to be. They knew the outcome.
They knew. Yeah. And I didn't want to talk about it. I told my wife about it. I just said, "Honey, I something happened. I gotta think about this before I talk to you." And it's very polarizing, Trapper. It really is. It sorts out, I won't say the believers from the non-believers, but who takes their faith seriously and who is not that serious about it, because you get, especially when my personality changed, because after that, it was like a new baptism. I was suddenly no longer interested in the things I was interested in before, and I feel I can remember it just like it was yesterday. And when I pray, I promise the Lord, here's where I'm human. I promise, Lord, I thank him every night. I thank him maybe once a week or once a month. So I should thank him more for it. Because
one of the things that I
was a dead man.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we stress here at Touched by Heaven is that there is the encounter, which you certainly had, and then comes the reaction. What do you do with that?
Yes.
And when have you listened to any of the episodes, or just called with a?
No.
Okay.
You're very new to me. You're new as of this weekend, so I'm going to check it out in detail. Yeah.
Not everybody gets it. Even in these powerful moments, I've seen people have amazing encounters and then deny God had anything to do with it. So I've seen some really interesting reaction. In your case, okay, you had the encounter, then comes the relationship. It's an invitation to a relationship. It's an invitation. It's a wake up.
Exactly.
You got to wake up.
Exactly. What I tell people it was, if you knew me, I said this was God's 2x4 applied liberally to my head. What he was saying was, all right, Jeff, listen, you've been following me for 30 years. You know stuff. Now you're busy. You've gotten, you're winding down your business. Now you're going to work for me, and this is how we're going to do it. And when people say, what's the best part of this and what's the worst part of it? The worst part of it is it involved death by drowning. I would not wish death by drowning on anyone. It's terrifying. So that I would not. It's terrifying. But the takeaway is, I absolutely have no doubt. It takes away because you've had this happen to you, and the Lord would say, well, how can you or anybody would say, how can you possibly doubt it? You should be dead. There is no earthly way. And the God of heaven and earth, basically, if you think what he did, he altered material space for me. He made something happen with water atoms and with pressures and things that were that were supernatural. So isn't that affirming? Good gracious,
Mm-hmm. Do you remember from your Coast to Coast days in the past, Dave Schrader? He would fill in for George Norrie.
Oh, yes.
You'll hear an episode in which I was on Dave's show, and I put part of our interview on a Touched by Heaven episode a couple back. And as I said to Dave Schrader, it's not a competition because people want to know, well, God's never done that for me where he pushed me out of an ocean. It's like sometimes we think it's a competition. I've never had an encounter like that. And why hasn't he done that for me? And it's like, it's not about that. It's My entry was a tap. It was a tap that there was just something there. It was a tap and a moment where God turned my vision back on. He did it twice. I had the best vision on planet Earth twice. Best vision on planet Earth.
Trapper.
Beautiful.
Unbelievable.
It is, and it's just God saying, "Hi, I'm right here. Lights on, lights off. Do you see me flipping the switch here, buddy? I'm right here." And in those moments, it's then up to me to respond. And then the response has to be, and this is the key. If you want these moments, this conversation to continue, the response has to be taking a step closer to Him, which you did.
Yes,
you started investigating. Who else has had this? What else is this? Is this God? Is this something else? Can I explain this some other way?
Yep.
You took a step toward Him, and then He did something else. And then there's like this dance you do. There's a dance. We're back and forth. You see Him. He sees you. There's a dance, and you get closer and closer.
I just love it, and I've got all these men friends, and we have tonight we're hosting a home fellowship group with our church. We'll have 15 people at the house here at 5:00, and I'm just if you knew me in 1989, 1990, you say, is this the Jeff? Where did Jeff Burgard go? You know, and I'm just a different person. It's just so anyway.
It's tremendous. That's just a tremendous story. That's a tremendous story.
Yep. And the other thing is, I am nothing special. I mean, I'm Mr. Everybody. You know, there's nothing special about me. That was the next question. Well, what's so special about you? Why should God do this? I said, I don't have any idea.
I do the same thing. I say, there's nothing special about me, and if you don't believe me, ask my wife. Because she would know. She would know. What a great story, Jeff. What a great story.
Wow.
So I want you now to wave to all of your coast to coast fellow listeners. You can wave to them now, and figuratively speaking.
Right.
And and as I say, I give coast to coast. We're recording this a few days before the interview, but as coast to coast listeners come and hear you. If this is something, like I say, I don't think I'm not their typical guest, but I so appreciate how they reached out and said, let's do this, So big thanks to Coast, and if you want more of that kind of programming, then let them know. I guess I would tell you, because there is this side to life,
Well, and it should be just like their focus is on the unusual or the whatever. This is a part of life. It's unusual, but it needs to be heard because many people I've talked to have never heard this, never even believed it. And so, the people that it happens to have got to say, hey, listen, you can say what you want about it, but don't tell me it doesn't exist because otherwise I'm dead in 1992 in the Atlantic. Simple
and my point, too, is you're a future story for me in a church because you'll hear this on the podcast as well. My life mission now, my purpose now, and it's very obvious I'm supposed to do this, is to go into venues, into churches, into anyone who will listen and talk about this because I didn't know this existed either, Jeff. I didn't know this world existed. I didn't know God was so interactive. I didn't know God was shooting off the flare gun all the time saying, do you see me now? Do you see me now? Do you see me now? I didn't know any of this. I didn't know any of this existed. And the trouble is inside church sometimes it's so quiet because we've taken the dazzle out of God. All of this kind of story tends to be on the internet, on a podcast, on YouTube, on weird channels somewhere. And these stories need to be inside the church to keep people in the pews. Keep people in the pews and bring people back that this is what God is doing right now. Right now.
Amen. And it's what a wonderful God we have. And when you teach Bible stories, which have amazing endings, and the Bible's full of them, you should say, Bob, God isn't on vacation. He's doing it right now with real people.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff Burgard, his amazing Touched by Heaven moment. At the end there where we were talking about how I'm going into churches and venues and talking about all of this, what God is doing in the world today. You don't have to go back 2,000 years to see the miraculous. Well, we are launching a new website this week. It may be up now. You can check it out. If not, it'll be up in a few days. The new website is called TrapperJackSpeaks.com. TrapperJackSpeaks.com. Check it out. There'll be a video there about what I do. It may look very Catholic. I don't just do Catholic talks, but that's what's there right now. But if you want someone at your church, your venue, your event, I may be your guy just to talk about what God is doing in the world today. And He's doing such powerful things, like Jeff's story. It didn't end 2,000 years ago. These things are still happening and should be shared with the world and just ignite everybody within the church There's so many bored people in the church, and I think that's why so many of them are leaving. They're just like, well, okay, whatever. Doesn't this just wake you up? It just fortifies that faith that, wow, he is here. He's here all the time. He's turning on ceiling lights. He's got a hand on somebody's back and shoving them through the water. I mean, it's remarkable how God is present in all of our lives, and sometimes we just have to call out. But check out TrapperJackSpeaks.com if it makes sense. You can contact me there. Also, I want to make available to everybody. I want to send to you these kinds of stories. So if you would like me to send you periodic stories of things I come across, could be a video, could be a blog, could be a podcast, could be anything. I want to send them to you. So as well as just kind of an update on what I'm doing on the podcast, if that particular week's episode would intrigue you, here's the story. If you would like me to send you this kinds of stuff, did I just do good? Did I just talk more gooder than some? Please books me as your speaker, because I talks more gooder than I don't know how's many pooples. So you can email me at the email address is trapper@blindguymedia.com, trapper@blindguymedia.com, or just go to touchedbyheaven.net and contact me there. Just put yes in the subject bar there. Just put yes, and I'll put you on the list, and I'll just send you, whether it's links to a podcast episode or information about a particular encounter somebody had somewhere. I just think these kinds of stories fortify the faith. So send me an email. Just put yes in the subject matter, and I'll send you out these periodic things, okay? If you want to drop me a note too, if you have a story, I want to hear your encounter story as well. But put yes in the subject bar, and I'll put you on the mailing list and make sure you get these periodic emails, okay? Is that okay? Okay. I think that's it. Thank you, Jeff, again. Thank you, Coast to Coast AM radio listeners, for checking us out. Hope to see you next week here on Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. See you next time. I'm Trapper Jack.